You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor, Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is... Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Sara Ackerman back on the show with me. She has an amazing new book. It's called Radar Girls, and if you loved her book that we talked about the last time she was on the show, Island of Sweet Pies and Soldiers, you're really going to love Radar Girls. This is a really unique historical tale about the World War II era, but the thing that really makes Sara's books stand out in the crowd is her attention to the fact that her protagonists are in Hawaii, and that's something a part of the story that gets left out a lot. And you're going to love Radar Girls, I know you are. Welcome back to the show, Sara.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you back. Sara, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but over the last, year and a half or so, the world has been pretty crazy, and we've dealt with, a worldwide pandemic and lockdowns and all of that kind of stuff. What has life been like in the great state of Hawaii?
Life in Hawaii, actually, I know that it was really challenging because we are a tourism-driven state, and essentially tourism, it did shut down. And so a lot of people, I think we had maybe the highest unemployment rate in the country, which was very difficult. And then at the same time, though, I think it was really, we had pretty low rates of COVID, and the people here were actually really happy in a way to have their state back and to be able to go to the beaches again and kind of enjoy the great outdoors without it being overcrowded. So it's been kind of this interesting, divide, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine. How about you personally? Did you and your family fare okay?
Yeah, we fared okay. I was working as a teacher, and then it's being an author is actually a pretty good job to have during a pandemic, except for the problem was for me, I was working on a novel. I was actually working on Radar Girls, and I couldn't concentrate at all. In the whole beginning part when everything was so uncertain and so kind of terrifying, it was really hard for me to get words down on the page. And so I try to write 700 to 1,000 words a day, and I was lucky if I could write 200 a day. So it kind of dragged out that for me.
I've met a lot of people who experience the same thing, Sara, that a lot of writers work from home already, and so being told you have to stay home and stay away from everybody is not really that big a deal for writers. But the mental aspect is really where the catch is, isn't it? There's just something about knowing that this thing is going on out there that really takes a toll.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. So, Sara, when the last time we talked, we talked about your love of historical fiction. How do you keep coming up and uncovering these great, real life stories that springboard to great historical novels? How do you keep uncovering these unique little corners of history that haven't been explored?
Well, I think it may be like other authors where I'm doing a lot of research for my books. And so when I'm looking through materials or reading through all these books, I'll often come upon something else that will kind of make me sit up and think, wow, that is interesting. That could be a great story. which is what happened with Radar Girls. When I was researching for The Lieutenant's Nurse, my second book, I came across the women's air raid defense, and I kind of put that aside, and then I tried to work it into my third book, but they were two separate stories, so I ended up just waiting because I knew it needed to be one singular focus. So I think it's me finding this stuff while I'm researching for future books.
Um, because most everything that you write is based in Hawaii, and we all know the story of Pearl Harbor, and how that really brought the U.S. into World War II, and that was the kind of instigating factor. I would imagine that since that time, Hawaii has changed a lot. With tourism, and I would think that the Hawaii of the 1940s was probably very different than the Hawaii of 2021. That's just a guess. How do you what do you do to help you get the feel of what Hawaii was like in those days?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know some of it from just hearing stories from my parents and then remembering the stories from my grandparents. And also, kind of having grown up seeing old photographs everywhere of Hawaii, and talking to people about it, and just kind of imagining it. We have a lot of remote beaches and remote places still. And so I will, I'll go to I go to a lot of the settings in my book, even though, it may be different now. But so I think just my imagination plus all of those other things I just mentioned, I think kind of bring it all together.
When you find out about the real life Radar Girls, how do you then begin constructing a story around this event, or this certain people group that you discover? How do you start finding the story in that?
That's a good question. I was wondering that myself with this book, especially because I had read the book, The Shuffleboard Pilots, which is compiled by some of the wards. And it's an amazing book and it has all their stories. But to write an actual story with a plot is different, than just kind of telling this whole story. And so I usually try to come up with my main character and who she is and what she wants or what she's running from, and go from there. And I have to plot this out beforehand because I need to give it to my publisher, kind of all plotted out beforehand. So I spend months just in my head, kind of going over these story ideas. And usually when I'm researching, I'll find one or two main points that kind of I think could drive a story. And so I'll have that being, usually it's in a way it's an ending of sorts. And so I'll kind of create the story around that and have it all leading up to this point in my head. But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I used to be more of a pantster, like I would write by the seat of my pants, not plot too much. But then when you get a publisher, they require a certain degree of plotting and knowing that it can change, but they want you to have it worked out beforehand so they know you at least have a plan.
That's important sometimes, isn't it? Especially when you're dealing with other people's timetables and schedules and all of that sort of stuff.
Right.
You said something that really jumped out at me just a second ago, Sarah. You said that when you're finding your main character, who she is, what she's running from, that is how important is it when you're developing a protagonist to have them have a problem that needs to be solved, and why is it good for a protagonist to have some conflict?
Well, I think that is one of the essential parts of creating suspense for a reader, and also kind of giving them that emotional satisfaction that they crave. Like as readers, we all crave that, even though if we don't know, may not be aware of it. And so there needs to be some kind of conflict to drive the story. Like what's going to happen? How is this person going to change? And A lot of times that's people, they sort of live vicariously through that, I guess you would say.
Um, Sarah, the last time we talked, we talked about your love of poetry and that you started writing as a poet. How do you, even though what you write now is not poetry in the traditional sense, do you feel like your time working on poetry and your love of that seeps into your fiction writing and maybe in ways that people wouldn't recognize? But do you feel like that was uh, a good tool to have in your tool chest?
Wow, you have a great memory. I do think it helps, and I think it helps when I'm writing about the setting and the imagery and kind of the sounds and the sights and the tastes and the smells and all of that. That is important, and I think I've just when I'm out in the world, I'm always paying attention to those, and I think maybe it stems from me having always written about those in poetry, and maybe that does help because I do love setting. Setting is really important to me, and I like to create a world where people want to escape into, because that's what I like to read.
For sure. When you're writing historical fiction, Sarah, um, there are events that are historical that people can point to, on a timeline that these things actually happened. And even though you're writing fiction, um, it has to be based around um, people and events that actually were there. How do you start constructing the fiction around things that are concrete? How do you create a fictional story with characters that are completely made up? What are some of the anchors that you use to ground the story, but then give you the freedom to create around it?
I think, well, place is one thing, obviously, which is very much grounding. It very grounds them to here in Hawaii. So place would be one thing. And then, like you said, there's certain events. These women, for example, they were training in Iolani Palace, the palace here in Honolulu, before they became the plotters. And so they were training there. And so I'll put them into this training scene in the palace. And, I have to do that. But I have my own characters and they're doing their own things and they have their own little personal issues or their fears or their whatever they're dealing with. And so I'll put them into that scene or that setting. Or another one happens to do with the pilots, the flights coming, they're guiding people coming in from Midway, so I have that as a kind of an anchor, and then the women are doing their job around that. So it's like I have my own characters, but they're doing things that the real people did, actually.
Right.
It can be challenging. Yeah.
Looking for a tool to help you visualize your story before the drafting begins? PlotPens is cloud-based and optimized for any device. There's nothing to download. From the new writer who isn't sure how to tell their story to the veteran who can increase their productivity dramatically, we've had experienced writers lay out a detailed structure for several novels in a series in a matter of a few days. The app takes you through 4 steps of the process: the concept or log line. Make sure you have a solid concept that you can keep coming back to throughout the process. The outline, 12 beats and 3 acts, each has a description of what should be happening with examples. The board, 40 cards. We take the 12 beats and add sub-beats to those, breaking it down even further and being very specific about what should go into each. These also have examples and descriptions. Right. We take those 40 cards and turn them into a to-do list. For a 50,000 word book, it's about 2 cards per chapter roughly. We have a beautiful editor built into the app. You can export your manuscript to a PDF anytime with the click of a button. Let plot pins help you visualize your writing project. Use code HANK10 to get 10% off plot pins. Plotpins.com.
Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web.
Tell me about the character of Daisy. Where did Daisy come from? And you know, what a great character. But she just kind of comes on the page fully formed, and you feel like there's this real sense of history with her and a real connectedness with the place. How did you develop her?
Well, it's funny because a lot of times I'm not really sure about where exactly my main characters come from. It's sort of like I do this daydreaming and then I'll take down notes, then a daydreaming and kind of imagining like what kind of person would be good or what kind of qualities in a character would be good for the story. And maybe, you know, she's probably a compilation of people that I know, probably a little bit of myself. And yeah, I'm always trying to figure out how to showcase Hawaii and its beauty, and I'm a bit of an outdoorsy person, and so I think that kind of probably gets into all of my characters a little bit too. But I think it's a little bit of mystery is how they actually come into being.
Well, one of the great things about Daisy is you have this backdrop of this kind of worldwide conflict. But Daisy has conflict of her own that is, sort of singular. That is, her world is much smaller and has conflict of her own, on top of all of this bigger thing. How did you start developing, not only Daisy, but what Daisy's life was like and what her personal conflict was?
Let's see. That's a good question. Sometimes, again, I'm not sure exactly. I used to be a school counselor and I have a master's degree in counseling psychology, and I've lived a long life. And so I think between all of that, it's somehow, it just develops into this person. And it's a little bit of the magic of writing where it's hard to actually put into words, I think, how I develop the characters maybe. But like, it's kind of like once I start, one thing leads to another, she's this, oh, and then that would lead to that. And then, oh, that would lead to that kind of thing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. The women's air raid defense or wards, what was that, and how did you start, educating yourself about these women that made such an impact?
Well, the women's area defense, there wasn't a lot out there on them actually, and they were set up right after the attack on Pearl Harbor by an emergency executive order. And in the beginning, they were just told they were going to be doing, critical secret work for the Army, and they'd be responsible for protecting Hawaii and their country, from further attack or invasion, because radar was just in its infancy then. And so these women were recruited on Oahu, and then they had radar stations on outer islands too. But they were essentially like air traffic controllers, and so they were plotting the planes and everything. And there was a book called The Shuffleboard Pilots, I think I mentioned, that these women later wrote, which actually was the most helpful. It was like my Bible while I was writing it, because they had all these stories in it. And the women were amazing. I mean, they were smart and courageous and tough, and they were so much fun. They had such a great sense of humor. So all of their little stories, like, for example, there was the lingerie thief. I tried to add into my book, just to flesh it out and make it real and use their stories, even though I had my own characters. Yeah.
So what was their job, for the people that haven't read the book yet? What the attack happens. A lot of men leave to join the war forces, and there are a lot of like happened all around the world. There were a lot of things that were left unattended to, and women who had not normally done those jobs stepped up and courageously filled those spots, and the effort goes on. But what was this particular job, and why was this so important to the war effort?
So the women were actually in this secret place at Fort Shafter. They started off on one place called Little Robert, that was the code name, and then they went to Lizard. And they were these command centers so there were 6 radar stations set up around the island. These were like mobile radar units, kind of in vans and trucks, and we were, and then there was men out there manning them, and then they would call in the information of what they're picking up on the radar. And so then the women were in the command centers, and they would plot. It was very complex. So if I'm making it sound simple, it's not. They would just plot those planes. They would track them, and also they would talk to pilots. They'd say it was night. Everything was blacked out here, so there were pilots coming in, and the pilots couldn't see the runways. Everything's blacked out, and so the women would, they'd talk them in. So they were kind of it was a really important job because the Japanese did come again in, I think it was February, and dropped a couple more bombs. Luckily, no damage was done, but and we had a lot of air raid sirens, and it was a terrifying time. And so these women were running, essentially in charge of doing all the air traffic control, really, for the military.
I would imagine that a job like that was, and the existence of the wards themselves were kept pretty secret during this time, because they're protecting them and protecting the work they were doing would be of the utmost importance.
Yes.
When did this start kind of coming to public knowledge after the war, and why isn't this something that we hear about more often? It's until this book I'd never even heard of such a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was top secret. They weren't even allowed to talk about it with their family. They weren't supposed to, because, radar, and most people probably know about Station Opana, which is the radar station up here on the north, the North Shore, that did pick up the Japanese planes coming in that morning on December 7th. But it was so new that they didn't really know what to do with it, and they thought that they were the American planes, and so nothing happened. But and so we had this new technology that was so powerful, and of course we didn't want our enemy to know about it. And so these women were, it was very top secret. But I'm not sure exactly when the information came out, to be honest. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly.
With a character like Daisy that is, she has a very particular life when the book opens, and then through becoming involved with the wards and the war effort, how do you envision your characters post-war, what do you think that the war effort did to Daisy and her friends?
Well, I know that a lot of, these women, a lot of them, they went back to their old lives. But I think obviously the war changed them. My grandparents, I mean, just kind of going off knowing my grandparents and other older people here in Hawaii who were they were school principal and teacher during the war. It was something that they always talked about, even 40 years later. It was just the war never left them. And I'm sure that for these women, it didn't. And I know that many of them remained friends until their dying day. They were close because this was 4 years of working side by side in a very, very stressful, important position. Had a lot of responsibility.
One thing that I loved about Radar Girls and your other books as well is that in the midst of this wartime and the upheaval and conflict, life is still happening for the characters, and good and bad, and the roller coaster of the hills and valleys that all of us go through. How important is it to maintain believable characters throughout a global conflict like this, to show that the characters still have ups and downs and personal struggles and personal conflict and happy times and sad times and all of that. How do you construct life within a great upheaval like that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to show that, because I believe, between all those big battles and all those big events, life does go on, and people are still having to, eat and go to work, and humans, as we know, they're social creatures, and and then we saw it in the pandemic too. The younger people need to go out, and they want to go out, and they still want to, have fun. And I think it's just really important to show the day to day as well as all the high drama points in it. And so, yeah, that's important to me. And I get my ideas usually from reading firsthand accounts from other people. Like I said in this book, that my research book was full of things like the parties that they had, and they just had all these little anecdotes and stories of fun stuff, as well as, talking about one of the wards whose husband is killed, and so I think it's important to put it all in there.
Was writing a book about a world war during a global pandemic, did you feel connected to the time period because of what we were going through? Of course, they're two completely different things, but a lot of the effects are similar, I would think.
Definitely. It was very interesting, very eye-opening. Just even things like rationing, or, when we were you go to the store and you'd see like, oh, you can only take one thing of toilet paper or whatever, hand sanitizer. And so these things, and then also waiting to hear, from the government, and then the lockdowns and all of that. I had never lived through anything like that. And it was a different kind of unknown, a different kind of enemy, but there were definite similarities. And I felt like it gave me a better insight into what the people during World War II experienced.
Sure. When someone is reading Radar Girls and they get to the end of it and they close that back cover and they're finished with the book, what do you hope they're left with, Sara? What do you hope lingers with them long after the book is finished?
Well, with each of my books, I feel like it's something different, and it's not even necessarily that I'm conscious while I'm writing it. But I do think for this one, I really think that the power of friendship is so important, and I would love for people just to understand that and to, I guess, come away with appreciation for the importance of friendship and how, in their own lives, their friendships need to be nurtured, and just that they get us through, and how just, I guess, how important that all is.
Absolutely. Radar Girls is available everywhere now. When you're hearing this, there's going to be links to it in the show notes where you can grab it in Kindle edition or paperback or audiobook. Have you heard any of the audiobook yet, Sara?
No, I haven't, but I'm very excited because Cassandra Campbell is narrating it, and she did Where the Crawdads Sing, and she is awesome. So I'm really excited to hear it.
Oh, that's going to be fantastic. That's going to be great. We'll put links to Audible as well, where you can grab the audiobook if you prefer it that way. Sara, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they find you online?
I'm on Instagram at Sara Ackerman Books, and I'm on Facebook at Ackerman Books. I have an author page, and then my website is ackermanbooks.com. So any of those places.
Excellent. We'll put links there as well. Sara, this has been so much fun chatting. We're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of Radar Girls. Thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wargate Books presents Hit and Fade, Forgotten Ruin, Book 2, by Jason Anspach and Nick Cole. Narrated for you by Christopher Ryan Grant. Chapter 1. The army of the dead walked straight into our ambush east of Fortress Hawthorne. That's what the FOB is called now, Fortress Hawthorne. Despite it being officially known as Forward Operating Base Hawthorne, as was originally intended when the 50 detachments of various special operations groups came forward through time from Area 51. A one-way mission to save Western civilization from a rampaging nanoplague destroying the very fabric of said civilization. Apparently, we overshot the temporal insertion point and stuck the landing. Sorta. About 10,000 years too late. Said civilization is now basically something straight out of Tolkien or Dungeons and Dragons, which we've all now gotten a lot more familiar with thanks to our resident expert and fledgling hedge wizard, the infamous PFC Kennedy. But the Rangers just call it the FOB. The first of our explosives to ruin the leading elements of the army of the dead advancing on us, Claymore Mines, the recaptured forge back at Hawthorne, had cranked out in the weeks after we'd retaken it from King Triton, were fired by Ranger Sergeant Kang down there with the Scouts and Captain Knifehand's assaulters. It was close to midnight when the front rank of bony warriors, carrying rotting shields and spears, eyes glowing malevolently in the deep night mist, advanced into our ambush. only to get ruined by the daisy-chained claymores' sudden eruption. Above us, a cloud-shrouded moon cast a wan yellow light over the battlefield. The night was hot, and spring was coming on full now. The pilots who'd gotten us here in the grounded C-17 back at Ranger Alamo, using their meteorology skills, had guessed it was going to be a long, hot summer ahead of us, and an early one at that. But there was a cold shiver in the dark on your exposed skin that you couldn't quite explain when you saw the dead advancing rank after rank. The bone warriors, carrying spear and shield, other darker creatures barely seen. The lower areas of the earth were graveyard cool and misty, so maybe that was it. Still, the brutal, unrelenting cold of our almost last stand back at Ranger Alamo was gone now. But not the horrors. There wasn't a night that some ranger didn't wake up out of a tormented sleep, breathing heavy, sidearms scanning the dark and looking for orcs and ogres to ventilate. I was sweating in the hour leading up to the attack, despite the night and the mist. Kurtz had us humping hard to get the 240 and all its ammo up to the top of a small hill that overlooked the area where we'd channel the advancing echelons of the Army of the Dead into further fun and games the Rangers had planned at a bend in a riverbed. If the approaching Army of the Dead continued on their current course track, they'd enter it for a brief period. It was decided by the captain we'd kill them there. And I was sweating. Not because of fear. No, not at all. "Firing," whispered Sergeant Kang over the comm as he detonated the mines. And 8 daisy-chained claymores spat thousands of steel balls all across the front line of what even I was still finding it hard to believe I was seeing through my night vision device. Skeletons. Warrior skeletons. Ancient warriors like something out of the Bronze or Iron Ages. Worked breastplates of molded plate or rotting scales. Green and tarnished, stamped with the markings of fabled armies fallen in battles long, long ago. Leather cuirasses on some, rotting boots, helms with broken horns, missing teeth, tattered leather kilts, beads and charms dangling from bone wrists, enigmatic holy signs and primal torques black with grave dirt, or from a funeral pyre long ago on some forgotten battlefield far from here, draped about the spine where the throat should be, where it rises to connect to a bone-white skull that seems filled with malevolent purpose and diabolical intelligence, malignantly so. Walking skeletons like something out of a Ray Harryhausen clay model Sinbad epic from the 1960s. Above, the sliver of moon gave enough light to strengthen our NVGs, making the night vision devices perform exceptionally well as we sprang our trap and watched the advancing elements get rocked by our initial high-explosive opening bid in the game we were about to play. The air was still and hot in the moments before the fight began as we lay there in the tall, sharp grass, waiting for it all to go down. I was thinking a hot cup of coffee would be nice about now, except my canteen only had cold coffee I'd brewed during the long, silent, and windy afternoon of preparation. Still, I was happy knowing I had some, rather than none.
Authors, if you're looking for a partner to help ensure that your book is the best it can possibly be, look no further than Pico's House. Crystal and her staff make a conscious effort to be critical yet courteous. They also strive to make the business side of things run smoothly so that you can rest easy knowing that your manuscript is in capable hands. Whether you need beta reading, developmental editing, a manuscript critique, line editing, copy editing, or proofreading, Pico's House is the one-stop shop for you. Check them out today at picoshouse.com to get started.